Now, we're going to talk about something for the next few minutes that I think are perhaps the most important considerations you're going to be faced with in this time, in this generation. It essentially is the subject of disarmament and the somehow coming to terms with the arms race. With me is Paul Warnke, who's the former director of the U.S. Arms Control and the Disarmament Agency under the Carter administration, and at that time our chief SALT negotiator. What are you doing these days with the Republicans in Washington?
I am once again a Washington lawyer.
But making tours around the country, as you are here in Miami today,
yes.
Talking about essentially what message? What are you saying?
My basic message is that the risk of nuclear war is growing day by day and weapon by weapon. And unless we can find some way to restrict the development of further strategic nuclear arms, our country, and as a matter of fact the human race, is in the gravest danger that it's ever faced.
Now let me try and represent what I have a feeling are some general conclusions
yes.
and beliefs held by the American people. One, we are really never going to have a nuclear war because the destruction is too enormous to comprehend, and while we might have it accidentally, we will never have it aforethought.
That is true if we exercise some sensible steps of restraint. See, at the present time, neither we nor the Soviet Union could conceivably hope to gain by starting a nuclear war. It would just be suicidal, because if we struck the Soviets, with our Sunday punch,
right.
They could still respond and obliterate our society. We could do the same to them. So under those circumstances, no matter what the strains, no matter what the differences, no matter what the incitement, neither one is going to use nuclear weapons. But as nuclear weapons continue to be developed unchecked, it means that the weapons on each side are becoming more deadly and more vulnerable. More vulnerable because the other side's weapons are becoming more deadly.
Mm-hmm.
Now, at some point, you reach a stage at which there could be a realistic expectation that the side that strikes first will win and prevent the other side from retaliating. As I've mentioned on a number of occasions, you'd be having a shootout with nuclear weapons, and you'd have to see which one could draw first. Now, that's the way a nuclear war could start.
Well, Mr. Warnke, what's in the future? It seems from our vantage outside Washington and outside the administration that the Reagan administration has embarked on a policy of taking us back 20 years in the arms race.
Well, I think as far as the nuclear arms race is concerned, that there are three factors that eventually will make for more sense and more restraint. One of them is just money. There isn't going to be enough money to do all of the things that they are now planning with regard to defense. They'll have to start assigning priorities. And I think that the strengthening of our conventional forces, the development of better anti-tank weapons, even tactical aircraft, and a rapid deployment force, more ammunition, a higher state of readiness, better training. All of these are much more urgent needs than any addition to our strategic nuclear weapons. That's factor one. Factor two is the reaction of our allies. If you feel, as I do, that one of the sources of our security is our strong alliances, then we have to be concerned about anything that threatens to weaken that alliance.
Yeah.
The West Europeans are very concerned about the lack of progress, in fact, the backward movement in strategic nuclear arms control. They feel exposed. They see themselves as the first victim in the event of a nuclear war. And they are very concerned politically. You've seen from the demonstrations the growing movement against nuclear weapons. So we're going to have to get serious about arms control in order to preserve our relations with our allies. Then third, the American public eventually demonstrates a reasonable approach. I think that it's very interesting to note the reaction in Utah and Nevada to the proposals to pave over the scenic splendors of those states in order to form a luxury apartment housing for MX missiles. Now, the Mormon Church, the governors, strong supporters of defense like Senators Jake Garn, Orrin Hatch, Paul Laxalt, are strongly opposed to this kind of deployment. It's when the idiocy affects your everyday life that you begin to call for the idiocy to stop.
Right.
And I think that as more and more of these weapons are proposed, you will find more and more of a public awareness and a public outcry against them.
People watching now, if they feel strongly about how they can get involved and help the cause that
Yes.
you're espousing, what can they do?
Well, I think it's very important to participate in citizens groups. non-governmental organizations that try to bring into focus the real issues that are involved here. As you pointed out at the beginning of our talk, there is a feeling on an emotional basis that being against nuclear weapons is sort of like being soft. I think that an educational campaign conducted by thoughtful citizens that have looked into this, and citizens that aren't, part of any particular political movement or anything of that sort, a broadly based citizens movement. I say that's the third factor that can bring about a change in what otherwise is a very dangerous course.
Well, I know locally we have the Coalition for Arms Limitation and Survival, and we're going to give you a phone number in a minute to where you can call and do that. It's interesting they've tacked on the word survival to arms control. Made that a part that
that is correct.
We're concerned about surviving, not just unilaterally disarming.
That's the issue.
Yeah.
And that, of course, is why the Soviets are just as interested as we are, and perhaps more. Because we don't have many interests in common.
Right.
We do have a common interest in national survival.
Indeed. Well, here's the number you can call, 235-4919, if you're interested in being involved in the Coalition for Arms Limitation and Survival. And Paul Warnke, we thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Abel.
We'll see what happens.
Yes.
We'll be right back.